Where did you find this guest, Andy?
I'm so sorry. Are you looking under the table? Did the die go off of the table onto the floor?
It fell to the furthest reaches of the room. Okay, let's try that again.
Chris, this is gaming 101 here. Okay, try and get it together, all right?
I'm the GM. I never have to roll, right? I rolled a 9.
A 9. How do you create memorable NPCs?
Make them bumbling.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a good GM. There. Shortest episode ever.
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion in which we talk about topics related to role-playing games. My name is Andy Rao.
And my name is John Corey.
And we are joined, once again, by former host of the show, Chris Salzman.
Hi.
Chris, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. It sounds like I'm never coming back. But...
Yeah, well, you did well enough in your sort of trial return episode a few weeks ago that we decided to have you back on one more time.
Thank you.
Actually, Chris, it sounds like you may be resuming your position as co-host pretty soon. Is that the case?
Yeah, giving John the boot, and then I'm going to take back my rightful throne.
You can't fire me. I quit. No,
Okay.
And, this is a good time. Let's just take a moment. I really want to thank John for stepping up and co-hosting the show. It has been such a joy just getting to know you in the course of having you on as a guest a couple of times, and then even more as you've been a co-host for the last couple of episodes. And yeah, we really appreciate you stepping up. None of us wants to imagine what this show would be like if it were just me talking. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I love being on the show, and I've always wanted to try podcasting, so this is just sort of the perfect opportunity, and you guys are so great to work with, and I just had a great time.
Oh.
We are great. Is there anything else that we want to say?
Handsome men. Yeah, you can't see it on a podcast, but it's difficult to look at them when we're working here.
Well, guys, at the beginning of the show, we traditionally kind of have a little bit of banter in which we talk about what we are doing gaming-wise and what is on our gaming radars. And I do not want to stop anyone from sharing a cool story about the gaming they're doing or the gaming they're planning, and maybe we can get to that. But I thought, as this is John's last episode as co-host, it's not really an excuse or anything. I just had an idea for something a little bit different to try. So I have prepared a couple of on-the-spot GMing dilemmas.
Oh gosh, okay.
I'm going to throw at you. They are multiple choice questions.
Oh, okay.
And the idea here is you need to imagine you've just been presented with a situation, the GM, and you need to kind of make a quick ruling on the spot. Okay? I'm going to state the situation, and then I'll ask each of you in turn how you'll answer. And answer as quickly as you can, and then maybe we can talk about it for 30 seconds. But I don't want to belabor these topics. I just want to... Okay? All right, and only one of these is really cringeworthy, I think. So, and I saved it for last, so brace yourselves. Okay, situation number 1. And might I say, I actually drew these from actual situations in games that I've either been running or been playing in. So these are sort of real. All right. You suspect that one of your players is cheating. The numbers on his character sheet seem suspiciously high. He's fishy about reporting his die rolls, and his character rarely fails rolls when he's reporting them. Do you choose one of these options I'm going to give you? A, ignore it since it doesn't seem to be bothering anybody else, and he's clearly getting something out of it. B, politely but firmly address it in the game, asking him maybe to roll dice in plain sight, or explain his character sheet math and call out fishy behavior when you see it. Or C, let it go in the moment, but have a potentially awkward private conversation with him later to figure out what's going on. John, what would you do?
C.
Chris, what would you do?
A.
Okay, so let's take 30 seconds and each of you explain your choice.
Explain yourselves.
Well, it's a good question. I think if I had a player who is cheating, most of the people in my games I know really well, and I don't often run the sorts of games where cheating really gets you anywhere that much. But if somebody were cheating, I would want to know why, because it would suggest to me maybe they're not having a good time. But if what they get out of the game is cheating, I guess that's a a different answer that I'm not prepared for.
Yeah, that's right.
I like lying to you in particular, John.
That's right. Well, this took a grim turn, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, what is your sort of 30-second explanation of your answer?
Oh, it's a game. So I try to get over it as much as possible. Yeah. Or I'd be really passive aggressive about it. So
Okay. Well, yeah, there's passive aggressive GMing is always a good option. Okay, guys, thanks. We're going to move on to the second scenario, if that's okay. Okay, topic 2. And once again, we'll ask for John's answer and then Chris's. All right, here's the situation. The player characters have accumulated a huge amount of wealth and treasure. They did so legitimately, although you wish you hadn't let them have quite so much, because now they're using all that wealth to bypass challenges and adventures that you've created for them. It's starting to hurt your fun as a GM. Do you, A, roll with this new style of game that they clearly want to play? B, have an adult conversation outside the game about the type of game you all want to play? Or C, have their wealth be stolen by thieves or confiscated by the king, or removed through some other in-game mechanism to try and get them back on track? John, what would you do?
Grown-up John wants to answer B, but I would probably do C, just because it would be more fun to handle it in story.
Okay.
So I would probably have them lose it, have them all wake up without any of their gear in the middle of a slave pen, something like that.
We've all done C, so yeah, let's just be honest here. Chris, how about you?
I've already forgotten the answers,
Okay.
but I think it was C.
That was the one where you use an in-game event to kind of steal all their stuff.
Yes, because if they have amassed a great wealth, they are now a target. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're asking for it by, just having the wealth, is what you're saying?
No, that sounds bad.
Yeah.
Down with the 1%, Chris. I'm with you. No.
Real bad. No, it's more like, they're destabilizing the economy and like we need to, right size things. And
in faux medieval worlds, the thieves are looking for the rich people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how this
So
works.
natural consequences for
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, here's the next situation. The players are fighting the big villain at the end of a long campaign. Partway through the battle, things aren't going so well due to a combination of bad luck and poor choices. You realize that the big villain is now in a position to use an attack or a spell or a strategy that could wipe out the entire party. Do you, A, have the big villain make suboptimal choices during the fight to give the party a chance? After all, this is their big moment. Or B, play the villain straight and let the dice fall where they may?
A.
Okay. And that's have the big villain make suboptimal choices. And Chris, what would you do?
A.
Okay.
Going back to the cheating question, I might actually cheat.
Yes.
I might encourage the players to cheat.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I have one more closing question. The party encounters a tribe of kobolds led by a kobold king. In your best kobold voice, you shout out something that a kobold would say. So let's hear your kobold voice saying something that a kobold would say.
I'll praise the great Dragon King. May he crush you and destroy your family.
That was respectable. Okay. Chris, you're up.
That was really good.
I stole it from James Giabato, whose book we talked about. He could do a great kobold, and I stole that imitation.
Yeah,
from him, so.
Michael would probably say something like, "Stop, you heroes!"
Okay. Neither of you guys employed the accent I usually use for any sort of NPC, which always sort of sounds like Mario with a Russian accent. So both of you do pretty well. Okay. Well, thank you for playing along with my little
That was
thing
awesome.
there. I've learned a lot about you guys, that you guys are just terrible GMs.
Yes.
You answered wrong about time.
Yeah, 0 out of 4
Yeah.
for everybody.
Oh, 0 out of 4.
Okay, with that said, I don't want to take too much more time before we jump into our topic, but does anyone have anything like really cool and big going on gaming-wise at the moment? Or coming up?
Just real quick, I got a Kickstarter fulfillment for a game from Free League Publishing, or Friga Ligen in Swedish. And it's called Vasen, which is apparently Swedish for sort of folklore or fairy tale. And what it's about it's about the way I've described it is it's kind of like the X-Files Victorian age. You are investigators trying to figure out these sort of mysteries involving trolls and giants and fairies and mermaids and put them to rest. And I mention it because it's gorgeous, and I'll put a link in the show notes, but also because it is the first time that I can recall that I've read a rule book. I'm almost done with it, cover to cover, in a long time. Even the Dungeon World book, like, I didn't read all the monster descriptions or all the, I skimmed many sections of many rule books. I know I've played Genesis and I still haven't read the whole book, but this thing I just couldn't put down. It was fantastic.
What about it was so engaging?
It really appeals to the way I like to play, in that it encourages you to create a sense of mystery and adventure, and the game is built around creating a sense of mystery and atmosphere but there are still statistics and things like that for these creatures and for the characters, but it more tries to evoke a sense and feeling. And I also like it because it says, look, we're trying to invoke 1800s Scandinavia, but don't get too hung up in the historical details of it, right? This is a fantasy game. So, if you want your doctor to be a woman, even though that's not something that happened that much in the 1800s, who cares? Or if you want there to be cameras but not trains yet, well, who cares? Make the world your own. Here's a framework for you to hang it on. And so it's just great. I love it.
Super cool. Did you see, there was a movie, I just looked it up, from 2010 called Troll Hunter?
I have heard of it, and I have not seen it, and I hear that I should.
I'm wondering if you'd like it. So it's a modern day troll movie. Yeah, you might appreciate it now that you're sort of immersed in that sort of mythology.
Yeah, the thing that's got my brain spinning on it right now is I'm reading the sort of GM Making Your Own Adventures chapter, and they're talking about, look, if you want to set this on the British Isles or in Ireland or in the Middle East, just take the Voss and the creatures we describe here, take their attributes and reskin them for where you want to play. And so the idea of playing a British Isles / Ireland game with, having to solve the mystery of the fairy mound or whatever, just it's got my brain whirling on that. So.
Yeah. I don't know anything about really the folklore of Scandinavia. Does it have a really distinct style or set of creatures or legends from other Northern European folklore?
Yeah, a lot you recognize. There's mermaids, sea monsters, fairies, but there's some particular ones that are kind of fun, and some of them are downright evil, right? There's werewolves, but then there's other ones like, I think they're called Nisse, but they're sort of these creatures that live on farms, and they're sort of like brownies or fairies, but they just make sure the farm runs okay. And as long as the family and them get along, it's great. But sometimes they come to loggerheads, and then they use their magic to kick the family out, and then what do you do? So it's just some interesting creatures that are not strictly the ones you know about. So yeah,
all of the other game books by Free League that I've seen have been just gorgeously produced.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And then I heard they were doing the One Ring, and I heard that first before I got this Kickstarter delivered. I'm like, I'll have to check that out. They're taking over the publishing of the One Ring, and now I'm really excited, where I wasn't before, now that I've read this game.
You're also going to need to read, and I'm sorry to give you like different references, but Peer Gynt by Ibsen. Have you heard of that at all? So there's a musical piece and stuff about it as well. But it's all about this, it's like Norwegian folklore and stuff. And I think he visits the Troll King at one point, which is a really fun scene.
I love that stuff.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for both of you guys. Is either of you guys planning to do any Gen Con online?
I looked at the schedule. I might go to one of the talks, but that's probably it for me.
I might do. Actually, Free League is saying they're running a Vossen game. There's no way to sign up for it. I can find on the Gen Con site, but they do have a YouTube link on their Facebook page, so I might watch that. I'll probably watch that.
I toyed for a moment. I just thought about what would it be like if I took like a day or two off of work and just like went whole hog and and tried to have a real convention experience, with a full booked schedule. But I don't really think I can justify that. So I do hope to get in on one or two games and maybe one or two talks as well. Yeah, nothing too dramatic. Well, cool. Maybe by the time we record the next episode, we will be able to report back on our Gen Con experiences. All right, well, with that, why don't we go ahead and jump into our topic? We rolled...
Shall I reread it?
Yeah, why don't you reread the topic and get us started?
Chris rolled a 9, and the topic is, how do you create memorable NPCs?
It's kind of a big topic. Yeah. Why don't we start with something simple, like each of you guys briefly describe a PC that went on to become very memorable for you and your players in a game.
I'm trying to like sort in my mind the ones that I think are memorable versus the ones the players
right
do.
Sure.
Right, yeah, because I think like I often feel like the ones that you spend the most time like getting the voice down right, or their mannerisms and all their backstory and stuff, those are the ones that no one cares about. It's always like the one that you just had to invent on the fly that's like, yes, that one, that's the one that we're going to focus on.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can start if you want. I remember going back to the, I think, AD&D 2nd edition days. I still very distinctly remember it was an adventure. It was like a pre-written adventure where the characters had to escort like a religious figure to his destination, and along the way there's, the various sorts of shenanigans and ambushes and stuff. And there was some short note in the published adventure like that the NPC was kind of a cranky old guy. So on the spot, I decided I would just play up his cantankerousness and make him a really ungrateful like recipient of their protection. So it ended up he was cranky. He was critical of their successes and even more critical of their failures, and it ended up being really fun and memorable. That quick decision of like, hey, instead of having this guy be a generic priest, why don't I just have him be like a cranky old guy? And it worked. So yeah, there's my story. I still remember that. That was probably 20 years ago, and I remember very vividly some of those exchanges.
Did you ever bring that NPC back in a different campaign?
I did not. Nope.
Okay.
In retrospect, I clearly should have, but I wasn't thinking that. Wasn't thinking that clearly.
There's still time. There's a friend of mine is playing D&D with his kid, and he created a character. He's a little like, he's a funny dude. He's a writer and stuff. So he created a character who was a real estate agent, like within D&D. So like a fighter and also a real estate agent. So I introduced her in one of my campaigns just for fun, and I really liked that kind of concept of just drawing from someone else's character from a different campaign, because usually those characters are a little bit more fleshed out than what you're going to come up with for an NPC.
I like those. I don't have one that I created, but I'll tell you an NPC story. Is that I was running a Genesis campaign, and one of the players had said, well, I kind of want it to be like a gang of kids, not bad kids, but kind of like, I don't know, like Oliver Twist or something, where there's this mean man who sort of makes these kids steal bread for him or whatever. And I'm like, that's a great idea. And so I went around and I had everybody describe one of these kids to me. And I'm like, you tell me what. So they all did, and they got into it, and they thought it was great. And then later, the kids got lost in this forest and were being chased by this monster, and they had to save them. And one of my friends looks at me and he goes, oh, I thought you were having us describe them just for fun, but you did it so we'd care. And I go, yes, that's exactly what I did. And that you didn't see it at the time is great.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Yeah. Andy, going back to your cranky old man story, so I think one of my favorite NPCs that I ever played was someone like a town mayor who just like didn't want to do anything, right? So the players kept on like asking him to like send the authorities to go get this like clearly evil person, and he was just like, no, I'm just not going to do it. Kind of sit back and taking naps and stuff during the day. But that was really fun because it was just like, rather than doing the thing that I think we all do when we're playing NPCs, where we're kind of like dishing out information slowly as they're talking, you're just like, nope, you're getting nothing from this person, and they just can't like players are just like, no, like I have to be able to ask you questions.
Look here, NPC, your job.
Yes, your job.
You're an exposition machine. Let's have it. Yeah, exactly.
When you guys plan an adventure, what kind of planning of NPCs do you do? So let's say you have an idea of who the key NPCs are going to be, and maybe a couple of key pieces of information about how they might interact with the PCs. Do you go beyond that in advance of the game, or do you just come up with stuff on the fly during the game when the PCs interact with them? How much planning do you do for your NPCs?
I'll usually do sort of a rough sketch, and it's usually based on locations. So like if I know there's probably going to be locations, I'll come up with the sorts of people who might be in those locations, and then from there it's just come up with somewhat of a personality and sort of take it from there.
So do you decide in advance, oh, there's going to be an innkeeper here and his personality is going to be this, and do you like write that down for yourself to remember? Like
I'm
trying to think what's like the nitty-gritty, like the real nitty-gritty, like how do you prep these people?
Yeah, I think the ones that are effective, right? So like in an ideal world, right, I would write down, where they're at, what their name is, kind of what they want, and then also at least a small description about some sort of like vocal tick or mannerism that I can inject into it whenever the players are interacting with them, just so I can have that thing to jump back to pretty easily, and whether that's like I physically do something different or just use a different voice, something like that, just to have that sort of written down, because if they're jumping around from place to place, you might not have that sort of locked in your brain right away. But I have, before sessions, I have sat down and looked at the NPC list and just sort of practiced voices a little bit, which seems a little bit more method than...
Yeah. Do you guys both tend to speak in the character of important NPCs?
I do. I try to do a variety of voices. I don't have that many good voices.
Well, we heard your kobold voice, so we know you can do that.
And they all sound like that. That's what the king of the land sounds like, a kobold. No, I do try to do different voices. I think it's fun. And I try to play to type. So if it's a pirate, he's "Arr, me hearties, I'm a pirate." I do try to do some of that. So yeah, I definitely voice, and sometimes I just do it regular because I don't have the energy or whatever. I can't come up with a good idea. If I've got a good idea, I go with a voice. If I don't force it to just for the fun of it.
Yeah. I don't do accents, but I'll try to do different inflections and stuff. Because accents it's very quickly going to end up, like you were saying, like Mario sort of talking like, right. It's just going to devolve into like whatever, bad Spanish I learned in high school, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just sort of, I'm not good enough at that part. But yeah, like I'll try to like go higher or lower or introduce little ticks and stuff here and there.
At some point, I've kind of slid out of the habit of speaking as much in the voice of NPCs, and I don't like that has happened. Learning to GM and when I was younger, I always spoke out the NPC parts. But later, as games with busy adults became more the sort of gaming I was doing, I started feeling a little more pressure to like not belabor routine interactions in the way that I might have back when we were kids. It's in those routine interactions, with the shopkeeper, that you can have a lot of fun moments of characterization and little role-playing bits. But as an adult, it's more like, oh man, let's get through this as quickly as we can because we only have 2 hours tonight, and then we can't meet for another month. So then I would start doing things like summarizing what the PC says, and that certainly does save time, and I do think it's necessary sometimes. But it's a lot more boring, and it basically prevents NPCs from being memorable at all. Do you guys experience that at all, or do you always try to voice key NPCs?
I'll find myself like trying to do like in character conversations, but then I'll summarize at the end of it sort of like what the important parts were, just because I don't want like note taking to be the reason they didn't understand where they were supposed to go. Like that's not fun for me. So it's sort of like, hey, we can have this conversation, then it's like, okay, now like this is what you were supposed to get from it, point A, B, C, like that. Which I don't know, maybe I shouldn't do that. Like maybe I should just like see what happens like that. But it's just, again, I'm with you. Like, I'm often running games where it's 1 or 2 hours at a time. So
I will do something similar, but I will also, like, if the NPC isn't important, or what I won't do is if players become very interested in somebody, I'll do one of two things. I'll either transport the information or knowledge that another more important NPC had to this person because they're interested in them, or I'll just make it clear this person doesn't know what you need.
Yeah.
Right. I'll just sort of seem maybe less interested in engaging with them. I like to make sure that they're not wasting their time and I don't like them to wander around. Let's just talk to everybody in the village. I think that was a time when that was sort of part of D&D, but I don't think it's quite as fun as I used to. Yeah.
If you look at some old D&D modules and other game modules from the era, a lot of the times, a large chunk of the module is just like a layout of a town or a location and a list of characters with this sort of assumption that people are going to go door to door. At least that's how I always understood it. that the players were kind of expected to just roam around talking to all these people.
I think I sent you, Andy, an email the first time I ran a town in a published adventure in the Lost Mines of Phandelver.
Mm-hmm.
I did that, like, I made them go door to door and meet every single NPC that was on that list, right?
Yeah.
And that session was 3 hours of me doing voices and trying to keep everybody straight. And like,
talk about exhausting
yourself.
yourself.
Yeah, like me talking to myself, and different NPCs, which is just the worst. Like, looking back on it, I mean, it was fine. We had fun, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, consolidate a couple of those NPCs. Like, don't tell them there's a shop and then another shop. No, there's one shop. Like,
yeah, there's a shop.
Yeah, there's a shop. Like, all those sorts of things. But
what are some of the things that take a routine character, like a shopkeeper where they're buying a new +1 sword? Mm-hmm. What have you seen make routine background characters like that become beloved NPCs that the characters joke about and they remember fondly and they look forward to visiting after each dungeon run?
That's a good question. I think giving them double duty. Maybe they're just there to buy a sword, but they actually do have something to do with the story. But the PCs don't realize it at first, right? So sort of you could one option in that is just go big, right? Make a big, hilarious character, and that's always fun. But the other is just to give them relevance to the story that makes them memorable, that maybe the characters don't know about when they first start.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, I don't think this is necessarily great. You just hinted at this, John. The easiest way to make NPCs memorable is to make them funny. And
yes.
that is fun, that is entertaining. But that does push your game, I think, towards that sort of adventure slapstick that we've talked about a couple of times over the show, where it's just a little too jokey sometimes. And
yes.
So I will, that's maybe one of my GMing sins, is that when I flail around for like trying to give someone character, I'll make them funny or snarky or humorous in some way. Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
you do that too much and it starts to feel a little weak.
Yeah, when I'm making NPCs, I like to I think the first thing is, and this is definitely a powered by the apocalypse rule, but I really took it to heart. Everyone gets a name, right? It's not the shopkeeper. It's and I'm horrible with names, so I actually keep a list of them around when I'm playing. But everybody gets a name and everybody gets a motivation. Not tied into necessarily the big political things that are going on in the game or anything, but everybody has a reason they're doing what they're doing, right? That they believe in. And if you do those two things, it gets a lot easier to develop the other stuff as you go. Yeah. And I always like to have more than one. Like, this sounds obvious, but maybe having 3 NPCs that have names and good motivations and are on different sides of whatever is going on is enough to get you started in a game. And then you can sort of throw together other ones as you go forward. Yep. But I will say I never work up stats for NPCs anymore. Yeah. I used to, but I now see it as a sort of colossal waste of time. Actually, there's a great, in this game, Vossen, we were talking about earlier, I was reading the rules and they said, look, all these rules I've just given you for these creatures apply to when they're interacting with the player characters. If a fairy wants to enchant an NPC, it just happens.
Yeah.
The NPCs are part of the story to drive the story forward. So stats, rolls, all that stuff don't apply to non-player characters because they don't serve the story in any way. So
I can't remember the last time I really statted up an NPC that I did not anticipate that somehow was going to get into like a fight with the PCs.
Right.
I stat up the whatever mechanical aspect of the NPC will be necessarily involved when the PCs interact with them. So if it's like Call of Cthulhu, I jot down what their most relevant skill is and what percentage it is, and that's the only thing I know about the NPC. Right. If it's D&D, unless they're going to get in a fight with a blacksmith, I don't give it any, stats.
Yeah. I think we're past the point where all our players are just going to attack everybody.
Yeah.
Who gives them the side eye,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not, but one would hope.
I have dreams of running a campaign, probably for like you two and some other people, where it is just that, like go back to your roots. Like, let's just do it that way.
If the king gives us lip, he's a dead man. Yeah. Exactly.
I tell you, sit in on like a middle school game of Dungeons and Dragons. Even with very kids you would say are very mature and cool customers, it's madness. Yes.
how often do you, like, let's say your players throw a curveball at you, like they're going to go somewhere that you just were not expecting. That's great, that's super fun, and then all of a sudden you have to come up with an NPC. Will you, like, ever just pause the game and, like, take a second to write down some stuff, or do you just go for it and just, come up with it as they're going?
I will often say, hey, can I think about that for a second? Or, it's not, does anybody need a bathroom break? Because now's a good time for me to take a break, and do need to think about it for a few minutes. I have done that. Sometimes I do it off the cuff. It depends on how crazy the new direction is.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about some, like, if you guys have any kind of concrete tricks or, like, recommendations that have helped you out or that you've read, even if you don't always do them. I'll start by sharing one that I really like and that has worked well in my games when I've taken the time to do it. And that is, when thinking about an NPC, try to attach a non-verbal tick to the NPC that you can do at the table while you're speaking as the NPC. So obviously there's like a limit on what you can do here, but like, maybe are they always touching their ears? Are they always like looking kind of above and behind? Do they always glancing off into the distance as if they're nervous about something? Are they always glancing over their shoulder? Those things are a little over the top, but they are kind of fun to do, and I do think that they quickly like attach themselves to the NPC and it becomes a little bit memorable. Have you guys ever tried like nonverbal tics, like he won't stop touching his chin while he talks?
Yeah, I know I must have, and I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I do think that's a great idea. I love that as a concept.
So that's just one little tip. Do you guys have any like little tricks you've used or that you've heard?
Yeah, there's one I like about creating characters, and it's really old, but I think it's great. There is a cartoonist named Will Eisner, and I used to read a lot about comics and how to make them, and I really enjoyed that. And in one of his books called Graphic Storytelling, what he says is there's sort of two ways to create people. Either create them to type, right? So if you want a muscle-bound lunkhead, make a muscle-bound lunkhead, and don't, with no surprises. Or play to the opposite of type, right? So that if it's a really nerdy guy who turns out to be a super strong fighter that you didn't expect, but start in those two places and then elaborate from there, because they can both, it keeps your character surprising, but it also, we're not trying to invent entirely new types of fiction here. We're trying to play towards a genre. So if you've got the Han Solo type and the characters are expecting it in the Star Wars game, just have the guy be sort of a smart-mouthed guy who owns a crappy fast ship, and that's good. Or have that be somebody you didn't expect in that same role. I don't know if that made any sense, but
yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, that's good advice.
There is a list of like 20 or so different vocal patterns that you can follow that I ran across a couple years ago, and I actually printed it out. Would take it with me to the table. So it just gave you like a really quick, like, oh, this person repeats the last word of every sentence, things like that. They're just like really easy to do stuff, like someone pauses before every sentence says, those sorts of things where you can just like quickly grab that and add it to an NPC. Yeah, I found that pretty useful just for like adding some flavor to NPCs.
That's great. Actually, if you can find that, I'd like to see
I'm going to see if I can. It was very like, you're talking about concrete tips. It's like, that was like, oh, okay. I can do this. Yeah.
Do you guys use pictures of NPCs? And if there is a picture available, say there's an illustration in a published adventure that you're running, do you like hold the picture up to the table and say, this is what she looks like?
Sometimes,
yes.
Yeah.
Yep, I'll do that sometimes.
Yeah.
I do that more with monsters than people.
Yeah.
If I have a cool illustration for a monster, I will hold that up.
Mm-hmm. I'm playing in Matt Wilson's Eternal Lies campaign. Matt, a former guest on the show, and he does a really good job. He finds like old celebrities who look like the characters, or current celebrities who look like the characters that he's introducing and stuff, and we'll hand out an actual picture of all of them to everybody. But it makes it really easy to visualize a character, like, oh, that looks like whatever, like Tom Cruise in a fedora or something like that, Right. Yeah, it's like you can look at it and be like, oh, okay, now I understand who that person sort of is. It's a nice shorthand that way.
Mm-hmm. I was going to mention Call of Cthulhu and other games like that specifically because they have that nice advantage of there's a lot of public domain photos out there of just people and celebrities that you can grab. for player characters and NPCs alike. One thing I wanted to mention that I find helpful, although it is a little bit more work when prepping NPCs, is to think not just about like what is their personality like, but to think what is their motivation going to be whenever they're interacting with the players. Like what do they want?
Absolutely.
Instead of like this person is just a blacksmith and they're a shifty blacksmith. You can run with that for sure, but if you add like a motivation to that, like what are they trying to do in an interaction with the NPCs or with the PCs? They're trying to sell goods, but without drawing attention to what's in the back room of the shop, and right there gives you a little bit something more to do than just always just react to what the players are doing.
Yeah. Maybe that person wants to close his shop early because he wants to go see his family or something.
Yeah, it could be something real simple like that, but it'll just add like an extra dimension to the interaction.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Should the NPC or the PCs be the most interesting person in the room?
Great question. When you started this question, Andy, I thought memorable PCs and my first NPCs, and my first thought was, is making them memorable important, or is making them serve the story important? And that is a whole different question. But I think that it's good to have NPCs that the characters enjoy interacting with, and if it's sometimes I'll have somebody who's a little nuts, and that always plays well, right? They always kind of enjoy the sort of off their rocker kind of NPCs, and if she's nutty in an entertaining way, but also in maybe a slightly frightening way, that makes them very memorable. And certainly they would outshine the PCs there, as long as you're not spending too much time with that NPC. You certainly don't want your NPC... Have either of you done the thing where you have like 2 or 3 NPCs having a conversation for like 5 minutes?
Oh, man.
Because whenever that happens, I'm always like, this is a horrible idea. I think exactly for what you're saying is, it's not about the NPCs, it's about the players. But so I hear your question.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Is there anything worse than having to role play a conversation between NPCs? It's literally the worst.
It's the worst thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So here, I will disagree with you. It's fun, but it's terrible. Like, I really enjoy the challenge of it. I think that's really fun. But like for everybody else, is like, this is totally just this is for me moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Chris, in answer to your question, that's an interesting question. I was thinking about like the sorts of stories that inspire role-playing adventures, like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and Narnia and, Conan Moorcock. And it's pretty common in those stories that they meet like weirdo NPCs that are real, like scene-stealing NPCs. Or think about like the last, action adventure movie you saw. Like they are populated by these kind of weird NPCs that the heroes brush into. I guess that works in like books and movies where the hero is like kind of supposed to be maybe a boring everyman. Whereas, I would hope that the player characters in a role-playing game are not boring everymen in that sense. So I guess I don't have anything too concrete to add here, but I wouldn't shy away from having like scene-stealing NPCs as long as, like John said, they're not hogging too much of the spotlight, because nobody wants that.
They don't join the party, and they're there all the time.
Oh yeah,
and they solve all the problems. And
they're
the best fighters and wizards and rogues all at the same time. Yeah,
yes.
That'll be memorable.
That's another junior high thing that the GM really wanted to be playing, so they have their character and they've min-maxed it, so they're the best character there. And
it is. Actually, one thing I really dislike, despite my story earlier about like having that one really memorable priest that the party was escorting, I usually try to avoid having NPCs come along with the party because I just don't enjoy keeping up like role-playing over a long stretch of time an NPC or remember like constantly have to remember that I'm responsible for like depicting this NPC's reactions to what's going on. And I'm often a little surprised at how often in like published adventures, even modern day ones for very popular systems, I won't call out any examples, I'm often surprised how often like you get the adventure wants to drop memorable NPCs into the party to be run by the GM. And I guess I understand the temptation, but that's just seems to me like it's kind of bad news, and it's not that fun either.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it's not something as a GM I want to do. That's a lot of work. on top of do all the other things I'm doing.
Yeah, because the party's either going to have to try to keep them alive or is going to sit back and let them do everything. Like, there's no way you're going to have an equal participant as an NPC, because, like, they're, by nature, expendable.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
Right? You know, the PCs are probably treating most of the other NPCs as if they're expendable, so this one is not going to be different, you know, in battle. So
I had a game not too long ago where there were, like, 5 NPCs who joined the party temporarily, and it actually went okay, but I think the real struggle was if I said their name, they were like, wait, that's that guy, right? They're like, that's the mystic, you know, and so too many NPCs tagging along. They didn't take the spotlight, but when I needed to say, this happens to so-and-so is behaving strangely, they'll go, so-and-so is this guy, right? And I'm like, yep, that's him. So, you know, I think having too many cooks or too many you know, busboys actually in this case can spoil the adventure.
Do you guys ever let your players take over the role of an NPC?
This is something that I want to do. The next campaign I run is going to have a lot of that.
Okay, like how so? Like, describe how you would like it to go.
I think, like, there was a podcast, I think, Andy, you sent it to me. It was an actual play podcast they were doing. It might have been Shadowrun or something like that.
I think it was Shadowrun if you're talking about what I think you are.
Yeah, it might, like, maybe the one-shot. I'm not sure. Anyway, but they would do sort of a round-robin NPC. Like, they would just sort of, like, grab an NPC as people were introduced. And so, like, player characters would just have different character voices for the NPCs, and they would just sort of do that. And the GM, like, the person who was GMing would step in if there was, like, key information, I think, here and there.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was just, like, they were just, you know, if they had something to say in the NPC's voice, they would just go ahead and do it. Yeah, it was really refreshing. I don't know how I would do it exactly, but it's something I'm really interested in trying, because I think there is sort of, like, there's more room to share some of the cognitive load of that creativity at the table than I think a lot of systems will allow for.
Yeah, I think so too. It's hard to do it. Your players have to want to do it, right? So, you know, if somebody has enthusiasm for it, I definitely encourage them to do so. Especially if, you know, sometimes you'll get a character who is knocked out, or, you know, in the game I'm playing, the Phoenix game I'm playing, sometimes people die right in the middle. And then do you want to be this NPC for the rest of the game kind of thing?
Well, you know what? We're coming up on about 50 or so minutes. It always surprises me how quickly the time goes, honestly. I really enjoy these conversations. Let's just take a second. Does anyone have any kind of final tips, just or quick strategies you would give to a game master, maybe a new game master who's struggling to come up with good NPCs? And I guess I can start with some very bland but useful advice. I don't know where I first heard this, but it's a great technique. You know, if you can jot down like 2 or 3 concrete things about an NPC, you know, any of the things we've talked about in the show, whether it's verbal tics or nonverbal tics, or what their motivation, or just their general personality, outlook on life, or even just their job. If you can get like 3 things down, that's enough to like roll with. I think 3 facts like that.
I would say don't make your NPCs over the top unless there's a reason for them to be. And sometimes there is, and sometimes that's fun. But sometimes that detracts from the story. If somebody's really big, you know, somebody has a huge personality, but it's not appropriate for the story that's being told, it doesn't really help the characters figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So there can be a good reason to do that, but think about if you want to do that before you do it.
Don't pick a voice you don't want to talk in for a while.
For a long time.
That's great.
Yeah. Because guess what? They'll ask that one a lot of questions.
Perfect. All right, well, guys, this has been a good discussion, and thanks again for playing along with my little series of
that was awesome.
mini questions at the beginning of the episode. We'll be back in a couple of weeks on a normal schedule, probably with Chris as co-host, and John is stepping down for the time being. But John, we definitely hope to have you back on the show
anytime,
as soon as you're willing. So, all right, well, guys, if there's nothing else to discuss here, we can sign off. I have been Andy Rao.
I've been John Corey.
I've been Chris Salzman.
And Chris.
Oh, remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.